calling the meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Apologies for our late start. The commissioners were in an executive session to discuss personnel and legal issues. I know that we have a group with us, and we will get to you. I'm going to open it for public participation first, if there's anybody who has anything they'd like to speak to before the meeting starts. You will also have an opportunity to speak at individual items on the agenda as well, but this is an open time.
My name is Stacy Morgan. I live at 424 West Avenue, and I've been a resident of Radnor since 2004.
Thank you.
I'm here regarding the St. Honore development that I've been to the Shade Tree Commissions and the Monday night meeting. Planning, thank you. I'm new to this and I don't know the process, and people told me to come to this meeting, but now I think it's not, I don't know. So I'm here because I've expressed concerns, and I don't really understand the process of what is decided in Shade Tree sometimes. Like, things are discussed about, like, maybe replacement trees or a larger caliper, and how does that get brought to fruition, or is that just a discussion, or does that become real if it's discussed at Shade Tree? I don't understand that. There was a discussion about an escrow account for my pine tree being possibly affected by the sewer tie-in. I don't know how these things work because I'm brand new to this system and coming to the meetings. But I have expressed concern about the pine tree on my property, and then the other tree is a heritage tree, as far as I know. It is on their property, and I guess they just have to do a fee in lieu of, is what I'm understanding now, that they can cut it down and do as they please, because they're following the rules and the ordinances, I guess. They could be stronger. Maybe that wouldn't happen, but I thought there were some alternatives. But I think I'm too late. This, just to show you where my property is. My property is right here. And so I have 3 driveways now going to be coming into my backyard all along this 170 feet of contiguous fence line. And this property has no driveways, this property has 1. And again, that's fine. That's their development. That's what they can do. I have just asked for solid fencing, green arborvitae, or cryptomeria, a hedge, and I'm not sure that's going to happen or not. I've asked for that. I also thought that the tree that is going to be chopped down, I think I'm too late because of the planning and everything, but it's a 100-foot drip line, and I thought I had suggested alternatives of flipping the road so the tree could be done, and then that would be in their backyard. I said, why can't these be pushed this way and you bend the road? I have offered alternatives, but I think it's just too late. I'm too late to the table. The other thing is, there was a lot of discussion in the beginning with neighbors that came about the lights. And there's 2 light posts on my property, 3 driveways, and now a fire hydrant. They're not on my property, but they'll be backing up to my backyard. And just to give you an example, this fence line here, I have built a whole border garden. I'm an avid gardener, and I've built a whole border garden. So this tree will be gone, and then I stuck with whatever fence they put up, I guess, or maybe I could put a fence on my side next to their fence. So those are my concerns, and I guess I think it's exceedingly sad that we're going to lose this beautiful tree when there might have been some alternatives if I had gotten here earlier in the planning stages. And I don't know. I know this is the stormwater management here, and I had said, why couldn't the lights be maybe alternately put on the street so that they're not all just shining in the backyard now of everybody? Why couldn't they go alternate? Again, the fire hydrant could be moved to the corner if I have to look at it, because they're going to keep an open fence or something. There were just, I think, alternatives that I think could be considered. And I know there was also, my pine tree is 8 feet. In diameter. Oh, here, this picture. I'm not sure. Let's see. So this is the sewer cap, and this pine tree here is 8 feet in diameter. So it's on my property in the corner, and this is the tree that they have talked to. I've expressed concern repeatedly and only found out on the walkabout that now they are going to kind of cut into that, and it shouldn't be that bad because they're coming in laterally to it versus across the roots. So again, that was discussed, and the shade tree offered up like maybe something could happen. The tree's priceless. If it dies in 2 years, it's priceless. It's not replaceable, but I don't know. They're cutting down 197 trees, and there's quite a bit of open space here. It's just seems like a clear cut, and I guess it'd be nice if the shade tree had a little more power, tooth. Ordinance is stronger. I don't know, something to help save the canopy that's being decimated by development. So that's all. Okay. And I know you don't answer me, I think. Okay.
We don't, but one of our commissioners is going to speak to you in the hallway a little bit more about the process. Jack Larkin will join you out there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks for
Madam President, I would gladly also meet with Ms. Morgan at any time to go through the process with you.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Is there any other public participation at this time? On the consent agenda, we are going to pull off the item C, which is authorization to adopt initiatives to be recognized as a Pennsylvania Audubon Council, Birdtown, Pennsylvania. We'll get to you shortly. I'm going to pull this off consent so that we can hear from you. Is there any other item on the consent agenda that somebody in the audience would like to speak to? Okay. Are there any other items on consent that commissioners would like to take off?
Not take off. H? Is that donor anonymous, or is that?
So I'm gonna remove H, and we'll go through that.
Okay.
Any other items?
Just H.
Any other commissioners want to remove an item? Okay, well, we are going to turn it over now to Birdtown, Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I'm Phil Whitmer, Vice President of Birdtown, Pennsylvania. And Laura Luker is here with me from Radnor Conservancy. And we hope that you're going to approve the new resolution, and we wanted to thank you for your continuing support for a healthy environment for birds and for people. For those who don't know about Birdtown, we are invested in promoting native plants, because native plants support native insects support native birds. Everything is tied to everything else. And if birds do well, that means people are doing well. So we have a couple of free signs for you, and hope for a photo opportunity. Thank you.
Can you, while we've got you, can you speak a little bit to what is Birdtown? We've got people watching from home, and maybe a little bit of background and why this is such a wonderful designation for our community.
Okay, so Birdtown works with municipalities, with a team of volunteers in each municipality to encourage people to plant native plants. So we're in the business of educating people about the value of native plants, about what is a native plant and what isn't a native plant, also about the many benefits of having native plants. A lot of people don't understand when we have issues in our townships and boroughs with water runoff, for instance, that native plants actually have deeper roots, they hold the soil better, they prevent runoff. We have, in this country, 42 million acres of lawn. A lawn is like a desert to a bird. There's really not much there for them. It doesn't support much wildlife at all. But the other thing about lawns is that it's sort of like green concrete. The roots are very shallow, but they're all very thick. And so when we get a hard rainfall, much of that water just runs off the lawns, carries with it the pesticides, the fertilizers, and whatever else people have been putting on their lawns. And that goes into our watersheds. That's going to affect the quality of aquatic life all the way down to Chesapeake Bay, for instance, or to the Delaware Bay. And so having native plants is one way to sort of combat that.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to make a motion. Can I have a second? All in favor of approving the ordinance to support Radnor as Birdtown for, I was just looking for the last 11 years. All in favor say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
If you would like to take a moment, we can do a quick photograph.
Excellent.
Thanks. Okay, thank you, everybody. I will move on to the other item on the consent agenda. This is item H, 2022-148, approving the acceptance of a donation to the Radnor Township Police Department in the amount of $10,000 to be used to purchase rugs, tables, and a display case to promote the history of the Radnor Township Police Department and improve the public visiting area immediately outside the police department in the lower level of the township building. So I will open this up to Mr. White.
Yeah, I think the commissioner's question was if we knew who the donors were, and in this case we do, and we did include their names in the legislative summary in the packet under the fiscal impact. We know that David and Kimberly Panici were the ones that donated this $10,000.
Thanks. I just think that they should get the recognition. I'm happy that you did it, and if there's something that we could award them in the future, I think that would be a nice thing to do. And thank you to them.
Yeah, if approved by the board, I think a little plate on the display case that recognizes their donation will be in order.
I like that idea, and we are so grateful to the Panichis for this very generous donation. I will make a motion and ask for a second. And all in favor to accept the donation, say aye. Aye. Thank you so much. I will now may I have a motion on the consent agenda
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
All in favor of passing the consent agenda, A, B, D, E, F, G, and I. Say aye. Thank you. All right, so we are on to our business agenda. The first item is appointments to boards and commissions. Dave Hartsfield, appointed to the Historic and Architectural Review Board for an unexpired term ending December 31st, 2023, and Eugenia Warnock to the Environmental Advisory Council for an unexpired term ending January 31st, 2023. Can I get a motion
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
All in favor of the appointment, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving to item B, which is the ordinance 2022-19. This is for adoption, approval of a handicap space at 422 West Beech Tree Lane. I will ask for a motion
So moved.
and a second.
Second.
Is there any commissioner comment on this item? Is there any public comment? I will call the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. It's passed. We now have discussion and direction from the Environmental Advisory Council on a survey. Donnell's here with us tonight. If you introduce yourself and tell us about the survey.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good evening. Donnell Jagman. I'm on the Environmental Advisory Council for the Township, and I've been a member for about 2 years and have lived in Radnor for only 3. I'm so happy to be here and to bring this Radnor Township Environmental Advisory Council survey in front of the Board of Commissioners today. As the EAC is planning on our objectives for the following year, we really want to hear from the Radnor public on what they would like to work on and also what their concerns are related to the environment in Radnor Township. A copy of that survey was included in your agenda packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions about those. This would be mailed out by the township itself and hopefully also posted on social media with the link, and we would compile the surveys and share them with the Board of Commissioners.
I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So you said your intention is to mail a hard copy of this, or is this an online survey?
No, this is an online survey. So this is a Google Forms survey, and anybody with a computer and the internet can access it. So we can email it in the township newsletter and also post it on social media for folks to follow the link.
And I would suggest that commissioners can put it in their newsletter. I would do so.
That would be very helpful.
To the substance of the survey, there is a question about owning or renting in the living space.
Yes.
So I guess my question is, why is that included? Is it necessary? A resident is a resident?
We did make it optional, but there are many environmental strategies for energy reduction or native lawns or environmentally friendly lawns or other initiatives that are sometimes restricted by people's ownerships of their home. So that will help us target how many initiatives we should focus on folks who anyone can do it. Somebody who lives in an apartment building, someone who doesn't have control over their energy provider or the overall efficiency of their home, compared to targeted initiatives for homeowners in the township. We have made this question optional. It's not a make or break question, but I think it would be helpful in us targeting initiatives for the coming year.
I would suggest maybe looking at how you phrase it,
Okay.
because I don't want people to think that we are really only looking to serve people who are owners of where they live versus people who are renting,
Sure.
because we represent everybody who lives in Radnor. So that would be my only suggestion. I personally love the idea. I think it's a very thoughtful way to go about picking up the business of the council. So I think it's a great idea.
And
It's-
I'm a renter myself, so a lot of times things like this come up about, let's get an energy audit of your home, but I don't own my home. And so it doesn't speak to me to do that. So I would appreciate initiatives that were also targeted at me, something that I could do in my space. So we can think about phrasing that differently.
Yeah, I think if you just lay that context out so
Sure.
that people know why they're being asked and that it doesn't feel exclusionary, because I knew that was not the intent. But,
Yes, thank you.
Maybe there's just a way to wordsmith it a little bit. Are there any other questions or
Yeah,
comments?
2 points, just to your point, Commissioner Maroney, as well. Maybe massaging it may be best, but I think that is important, because if you rent, you're not going to put a $100,000 solar panel on your, and we're missing out on that. So if that got forwarded to the owners or whatever, I don't know. Again, if it's delicate for some people up here, I get it. You know, we're not trying to shame anyone for if you own it or if you don't. But I think those questions are important when it comes to large investments in where you live, and if you rent, you're not gonna do that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's great. The only thing that if you could do is when you get those results, we're doing the comprehensive plan. I think that the members of Michael Baker would probably like that too. That's just good information for them as well when it comes to. It may come down to demographics, solar. It's just part of something that they should know about as they move forward. So sharing that with them or giving that to staff to share with them, I think, is important as well.
We certainly will make it available.
But thank you.
Yeah, in general, I'm not a fan of surveys, but mostly because I find, as Sean was sort of sideways alluding to, that the information is never compiled and returned back in a useful fashion. So I commend your sincerity in asking these questions, and I commend the whole idea, but I think getting the information back to us is all important. My only other comment is, in your list of environmental issues that concern you the most, I mean, I don't know whether you want to, you say just pick your top 3 concerns, whether you might want to have people rank them. You know, sometimes people don't sort these things into only 3 concerns. And I just want to make a plug for the air pollution line in that I am not a fan of gas-powered blowers at all, and I think that they're a plague on the township. So
We have heard that recently.
it's fall season, so
Yeah, but right now they must select, or they can only select 3. And, you know, we're trying to keep the surveys short, so we'll see if we can have them rank them in any way. I will say that this kind of strategic planning is part of my career, so I appreciate your sentiments about not seeing the results. We'll make sure that you see them. Anything else?
Any other questions? Any questions from staff? No, seems great. I would just ask you, you know, in order to deploy it, you'll be working with Molly Gallagher, and maybe there's some conversation about tweaking some of the language, but otherwise, I'm excited to see the results.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Danelle. Okay, item D is Shade Tree Commission request for consideration of a tree maintenance pilot program. Is this going to be you, Mr. Foster?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Just to give a little background about this information, this is years in the making, and it's exactly what the title sets out to be. It's our tree maintenance program that we want to try to kick off. In order for us to protect the township's tree canopy, this was definitely needed in order to do that. And it started off with the Shade Tree Commission working on compiling this program, and then it was taken to the township manager, Bill White, to vet it. And after he did that, we were able to now bring it before you. And we have the chairman of Shade Tree, Seth Risa, here to answer any questions you might have, and that brings us up to date with where we are.
Good evening, Commissioners. So the summary of this is we've been working on this over the past several years. Now that we have a well-oiled machine of bringing down hazardous trees throughout the township and planting new trees, a long-term savings across the board is before trees become hazardous, let's do some maintenance to them. So pruning, devining, and possible injections. So the goal of this is to flip from more of a reactionary approach to a, doing a maintenance beforehand before trees get to a dire state. So in surrounding townships, you've probably heard of some townships having on-staff tree company equivalent capabilities, including equipment and manpower. We feel to introduce this to the township, it would make most sense to wrap this into a pilot program. Obviously, we wouldn't want to make $1 million investment in capital equipment and staff, but we feel like this would be a good introduction. And as you can see in the memo, what we would target first would be the Radnor Trail and the Willows. Those two areas have been identified as having an opportunity for devining, pruning from both a safety perspective and then also just a long-term tree removal perspective. So out of the budget that's used every year for tree removals, part of that budget would go towards this maintenance program. So the idea being long-term savings and improving safety throughout the public areas of the township. Any questions?
You touched on it a little bit because I was about to shoot it over to Mr. Tate and Mr. White, but about how we're going to pay for it. So, or maybe you, Mr. Foster, can speak to it. What won't we be doing while we're diverting a portion of the funding to this pilot program? Like, how are we working out the needs? Like, how do we get to this?
So annually, we include in the general fund under our tree maintenance, a tree maintenance contracted service line item, $250,000. And that does, almost exclusively go towards the removal of the trees. So what the thought here is that we carve out $50,000 of that for this pilot program. How much we spend of that allocation of funds depends on the number of trees that are identified for removal. In some years, I only have a couple years of history up on my screen, but we've spent as little as $120,000 in a year. This year has been a little bit heavier because of the trail and a couple of the parks where we've had to go in and remove a large number of trees, so we're up over $300,000 this year. So what we would do is target, to the extent possible next year, the number of tree removals, keeping it around 200,000, and then using the 50 for this pilot program. And if it, obviously, the long term, if it's successful and we want to expand it on a more permanent basis, we'll have to figure out how to fund it then. But for the pilot, for the 1 year, that seems to make the most sense, at least from our perspective.
And can you describe a little bit, just because I don't know, how tree maintenance like this would save trees? Like how, what do you do to identify a tree that might be in danger, or like how would you choose the trees, and what do you do to keep them healthy?
Sure.
so that they don't have to be taken down.
Sure. So annually, what we would do, just like we did for this proposal, would be working with the township arborist to identify high congested areas that do need a lot of maintenance. But from a pruning perspective, for instance, if a tree is left go and it's overgrown, pruning can help save that tree versus letting it go and maybe a year or two down the road it needing to be removed. And as we've all seen throughout the township, trees just covered in ivy, that's really detrimental to the tree itself. So getting those trees devined, and with all of this being the goal of hopefully, over the next decade, we'll see the amount of trees that need to be removed throughout the township are reduced because of this. And then we all know our lovely ash trees throughout the township that have needing to be removed. Those are tough to save with injections, but we could get a couple more years out of them doing a program with injections. But outside of pruning, devining, and injections, there's all sorts of other maintenance that can be done to these trees.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Are you going to be
Jen?
assessing trees as part of this program? I didn't see that in there, but after big storms and the tree, the roots are a little bit looser on trees that might be questionable. Are you guys going to take into consideration looking at trees?
I think that would be a long-term goal of this program. I think those types of, Mother Nature events would still be categorized as, the township gets a call and, there's a tree in a public safety concern area that would need to be removed. But certainly, we would be doing this annually to start and maybe more frequently in the future. But starting with those, high need areas first.
Other comments, questions? This is just for discussion and direction, so I think I'm just kind of looking for some shaking of heads if we're good with this. Am I seeing some consensus? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We
Appreciate
look
it.
forward to hearing some of the results.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our regular business agenda, and we are moving into budget discussion. So this is the first of two meetings where we will discuss the final 2023 comprehensive budget. It'll be introduced tonight. Hopefully we have a really good discussion around it, and at our next meeting we will be voting to approve it. So I think I am going to have Mr. White come to the main podium. Give us
the equipment so we can present from the side. This is our lone presenting spot. So.
Yeah, I told you I like bringing you up to the right in front of us. And while you're getting set up,
Right mouse. All right. That's fine, yeah. I'm getting better at setting up here, so it's happening faster. Yeah, well, just in time for, the rest of the equipment for the room is scheduled for delivery in January. So then we'll get the monitors and the technology hookups in the other areas of the room to help out for these types of things. So maybe I'll get started if that's all right. Do you mind if I'll get rolling since everyone's within earshot? And I've been told a couple times today that there's a football game on tonight. So I'll try to keep this so that maybe we'll see the last 2 minutes of the game. So the real intention here is to provide some updates on the discussion that started back, the public part of the discussion that started back in September when I presented the township manager recommended budget. So I'll give a couple updates on, some things that have changed since that time. We've had a couple months go by, so we have a better idea of where we're going to land in 2022. And then take a look at the 2023 budget summary, most of which has stayed the same. We've only moved a couple numbers around based on some of our public conversations. And then a quick tax rate discussion. And then ultimately, the goal is to introduce the ordinance that includes the 2023 millage rate, and it also adopts the appropriation budget for 2023. So as President Maroney said earlier, this would be introduction tonight. Based on what the board decides on the millage rate, that will be included in the ordinance that the solicitor's office will advertise then for the November 28th meeting. Just to kind of recap where we started when we presented the budget, we had some very broad goals that we were looking to achieve. Most importantly, on the operational side, is maintain a balanced budget while ensuring that we're not interrupting the excellent services that our departments offer by maintaining the current staffing levels and funding for their necessary capital replacement purchases. And then we had talked a little bit about financial sustainability, our reliance on business taxes, and how that impacts our ability to fund operations, especially in times where economic conditions cause wild swings in those revenues. And then continue to talk about the sanitary and stormwater funding situations. The next two items down in the agenda is the sanitary sewer rent. So Mr. Tate will be presenting on that. So I will not be going into that here. Bob will step through that. I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but this is just a recap on all the elements of the budget that we've discussed to date since September. And we had the high-level presentation of the budget. We had departments come back the next meeting and give a very high-level summary of the services that they provide. We then presented capital needs and had a discussion on outside organization funding. And then we've also had some one-on-one meetings to address specific questions with commissioners. Again, from the general fund standpoint, which is where the real estate taxes are deposited and funds all of our operations, the 2023 budget has current staffing and operating levels, so no significant changes there. Includes the departmental capital and fleet replacement items. Again, continuing to highlight that we were able to get through the last 2 years without any adjustments in revenue, thanks to the stimulus money we received from the federal government at roughly $1.7 million in each of the last 2 years. So for 2023, we will not get that money. So that's a big drop in revenue. We offset some of that with a little bit more aggressive Act 511 and permitting revenue estimates. But the bottom line is that the general fund needs about $564,000 to balance for 2023. Taking a little bit closer look at the revenues, this is very similar information to what I presented back in September. You'll notice that we've added a column. There's a township manager column and a board-approved column. We're moving from the township manager recommended budget. Ultimately, what the board adopts at the next meeting will end up becoming the board-approved budget. From the revenue standpoint, nothing has changed. There has not been, we have not amended our estimates or any significant changes here. The highlights continue to be the same. For business taxes, we've been asked a couple different times. We're sitting at almost 16 million year-to-date actual this year. Why the reduction looking ahead to next year when it turns out about 1.6 million of this year's increase in revenue is coming from audit proceeds and lump sum discovery payments that are not not elements of that program that we count on from year to year. They're not the typical ongoing payments. And the other significant item on here is that the 1.67 million from the federal money highlighted in green in 21 and 22 is not going to be here in 2023. On the expense side, again, highlighting what the changes from the presentation in September to today. All of the elements of the operating budget are the same. The only changes are the result of the conversation we had with the organizational funding at the last meeting, adjusting those figures to match the requests by the various entities. So those changes were made. And then there's also a $12,000 reduction in our capital transfer after revisiting some of those numbers. So that's why those are highlighted. Other than that, all the other elements of the budget are the same. From an operating standpoint, the staffing levels are the same. And that pretty much carries, as the pie chart indicates, 60 to 70% of the budget. This is a similar slide as the last presentation, just showing the year-over-year consistency in spending. I enjoy this just from the standpoint of being able to compliment the department heads in their efforts to try to keep these numbers as level as possible in spite of ongoing increases in other areas. Staff is doing their part to make sure these expenses are not growing too quickly on us. And this is just the same information broken down amongst the departments. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail tonight, but you could see when you, at a quick view, across the board, all of the departments are staying very level with spending, and that's, again, a compliment to them and one of our goals, quite honestly, as on a daily basis, as I'm sure they will attest to. So then when you put it all together, revenues and expenses, we get closer to identifying the bottom line. And so when I presented in September, we're at $483,000 and change deficit. With the changes made to incorporate additional funding for some of the outside community organizations, we're at $563,000. So in balancing the budget, that would be the first step. And then we'll get into some of the other goals here in a moment. But what also came up after the presentation in September is, and this is something that we used to make part of the budget presentation. I'm not sure why it went away. Maybe just people were familiar with it, so we felt like we were talking about something that everyone had a firm grasp on. But it was recommended that we revisit this, and that's just a quick tax rate overview. A quick discussion on what is assessed value, what is millage, and I'm sure that the commissioners are aware of this. This is actually for the larger audience who may be watching now or at some point in the future. Who are we paying real estate taxes to, and then how does that funnel down to the Radnor Township tax rate and what we're trying to accomplish with the budget. So very quickly, assessed value is the value assigned by Delaware County for purposes of charging real estate tax. Delaware County sets these assessed values. The township has little input, in fact, no input unless we're either defending an assessed value or challenging an assessed value through the courts. But those are set by the county, and again, for the purpose of charging real estate taxes. Then the millage, when we talk about what the millage is, and that's important because that's ultimately what is in the ordinance, is setting a millage rate. And that, in real simple terms, is the tax rate. And it's a millage, so it's applied at 1/1000th of your assessed value. So in this presentation, we put a quick calculation together. The median assessed value in Radnor right now is, this is actually a year old now. This is based on the tax duplicates we received last year that we used for the 2022 billing. $547,260. Radnor's current millage rate is 2.2837. So you take your assessed value, divide it by 1,000. So that says that $547.26 of that property is taxable, and you'll apply the rate. So our millage is 2.2837. So this house has a face real estate tax bill for just Radnor Township at $1,249.78. State law mandates a discount period of 2%. So if you pay in the first 60 days after the bills are mailed out or before March 30th, March 31st annually, you'll get a 2% discount. So for this house or this property, the amount that they would most likely pay in real estate taxes to Radnor is $1,224.78. And it's been a couple years since I looked at the percentages, and I'm not going to put Amy on the spot, but overwhelming majority of the properties in Radnor pay in the discount period, as you would imagine. So then who are we paying property taxes to as property owners in Radnor? There's 3 different taxing entities. We have the school district, the county, and Radnor Township. And I know it goes without saying, but to emphasize, that we're in our budget discussions, we are talking only about Radnor Township. The school board sets their millage rate, and the county sets their millage rate. Extending the same example to all 3 taxing entities based on current millage rates, that same house is paying a total of $10,682 for all 3 of their tax obligations. For the township, looking at the pie, we are the smallest piece at 2.2837. And since I'm presenting on it, I'll take a second to just brag on what we're able to do with that. I mean, we saw at the second meeting in September when we had all the departments up here talking about everything that they cover and all the services they provide. That 2.2837 mils is what's funding basically a third of that. And we saw from the revenue pie chart a few slides ago that we have the business taxes, and then we do have the permitting and the departmental earnings and those revenue sources that also help. But the township is fortunate to have a strong business tax base that helps keep that millage a little bit lower. But I think we also do a pretty good job of turning that into a great deal of service. Over the years, when we just take a look at the Radnor Township rate, this was presented back in September. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But from an operating standpoint, we've been pretty much using the same millage every year. That has not been adjusted going back to 2012. The adjustments in the tax rate over this time period have been dedicated towards very specific things, such as the park and trail bonds in 16, addressing some of the OPEB concerns starting in 19, and then 2020, raising some additional funds for dollars that were going to the fire companies. But from an operating standpoint for the township, we've been at the same levels since 2012. And again, we've been able to do that largely because of the strong business tax base. So for 2023, I had presented a budget that included a millage change of 0.1028. The arithmetic when applied to our millage was 4.5%. It's not uncommon for everyone to hear 4.5% and immediately apply it to the $10,000 number we saw in total taxes. So that gets very confusing, understandably gets confusing. This adjustment, maybe more a different way of looking at it without confusing the different taxing entities is would equate to 0.0103% of your assessed value. So if you know what your assessed value is, this adjustment is 0.0103%, so 0.000103 adjustment. For the township, it generates $657,000, and what that $657,000 does for us is it covers the deficit. sorry. So it achieves the targets that that I talked about earlier in the presentation. So it balances the 2023 operating budget. We're not worried about 2022. We're going to be okay. So that's a typo. So it balances the 2023 budget, and it does start helping us to address capital. So the budget would include capital for the departmental vehicles and equipment. It does include a facilities bond, or generating some revenue to pay for the debt associated with the facilities bond. And as we discussed at the second meeting in October when we talked about capital, facilities have a little bit more higher priority from a need standpoint. So the bond makes sense because it gives us the money immediately to start addressing those concerns versus raising cash over years and delaying some of those improvements for a time period longer than the asset could probably handle. So that's why that was suggested as a bond. And then the last bullet point, there is a small amount of surplus at that $657,000 number to offset any kind of variation that we get from business taxes. And then going back to the financial sustainability part of the goals is to lessen our operational reliance on business taxes and start shifting shifting the business taxes over to more the capital side. So again, we're trying to address capital. If we can fund more of our operations from real estate taxes, which is reliable, then the variations we get in the business taxes can help fund capital. In good years, we have more capital money. In bad years, we're suspending projects and just having to wait. But it's not putting us in a position where if we have a bad year or two in business taxes, where the board's having to contemplate a big increase in real estate taxes to plug the gap operationally. And that part of this whole thought process is meant to be, a long-term game, not something that we're going to accomplish in 1, 2, 5 years. It's something that will take a long time to get there, but it would ensure the township's financial sustainability for a very, very long time and allow us to start addressing those capital projects on the list that we presented at the last meeting. That is close to $17 million today. And as each year goes by where we're not doing capital, that list grows. So that's what was presented. That's where we're at with the budget. For tonight, we had, so last year we had done a little scorecard at the end that kind of helped steer the decision and discussion. So I had put this together for this year. Last year we had a lot more variables on the table. This year it's pretty much status quo on the operating side. We do have the facilities bond that would add $260,000 roughly to the 2023 budget, and then the deficit that we're looking to overcome. In fact, if I zero that out, that's when we'll see the deficit. And then at the bottom, this was on last year's presentation, so I kept it there just so the board can see. We did adjust the numbers from what was in the township manager recommended budget, which is what TMRB stands for, versus what is included now in what eventually, once adopted, be considered the board-approved budget. So I did a little better than the fourth quarter 2-minute warning, so this is where we would look for discussion with the board on elements of the budget. Adds, subtracts, and ultimately getting us to a millage rate that we want to include in the ordinance for the solicitor's office to introduce. I'm ready. I'm going to stand here because we can do this real time.
Okay, good. I'm going to open it up to questions and comments from commissioners. Who wants to start?
If we were to use a lower millage, what would be the first thing that would end up getting cut?
So I would start with the departmental capital. It would be the replacement elements, anything that's is not obligated under an existing capital lease. And depending on what the number is, we would prioritize from there.
And in concrete terms, why is that bad? Why is that okay? Why is that?
Well, it's not ideal because it's delaying an inevitable. So a dump truck is going to eventually break down. A police car is going to break down, and those costs, the longer the life cycle is extended for any one of those vehicles, the costs increase exponentially to keep them running. So we get into a situation where we're saving money and not spending on capital, but we're actually eating into some of that savings through transmissions and timing belts in the middle of the engine and cooling systems and hoses, rods, hydraulics, all that stuff.
Cool. Thank you.
And can you, so the capital that you're just referring to there, that if we ask you to sharpen your pencils, you're going into department capital costs. Is that separate and is that different than the capital that would be in the bond? Would it change that conversation about the bond?
Well, honestly, if we adjust the millage from what's being recommended, depending on what the number is, I think the facilities bond is going to have to wait. I wouldn't want to introduce a new expense that's unfunded on top of the situation. But I mean, I don't want to narrow this down to exactly what would be cut. We have other options. We do have fund balance that we could appropriate if we wanted to ease into whatever the millage rate is. That's another option. We do have a healthy fund balance. The 2022 business tax excesses that we received over budget is going to help that number. So that's another option.
Are we where we are supposed to be on the fund balance? We're required to, can you talk about that a little bit?
This is going to get a little small, so I apologize if it's hard to see. Let me see if I can.
And Bill, we're talking about the reserves, right?
Yeah, so this is again, this is probably something that the commissioners are more aware of, but for the benefit of the larger public, we have a 25% fund balance policy, 25 of expense fund balance policy. 15% is mandated as the absolute floor. When business taxes represent more than, I think it's 30 or 33, a third of the revenue budget in the general fund, the additional 10% gets us from 15 to 25%. And in every year, the business taxes have exceeded that percentage. And this year, they will absolutely with the revenues that we've generated. So, so where we're at, so we have at the bottom of our forecast table, a fund balance policy amount that's calculating what we need to have in reserves versus excess or shortfall. So let's look at 2022. So we'll have, let's use this number. The original budget, we'll spend a little bit, this is a good number. This is a good number for our conversation. So we do have excess. Don't look at year-to-date actual. We're going to spend down that number significantly in the next 2 months with pension and debt obligations.
Bill, just ask it another way. If we were to take $650,000 out of the reserves, would we still be within compliance?
Yeah.
And if we were to do that, and we had similar success in 2024 in finding 2023 tax dollars not paid, it could be we could replenish that account?
Well, so anytime there's a surplus where revenues are greater than expenses, it by default goes into fund balance. And so, yes, if we have another good year on revenue, it will replenish that. In fact, we were having the same conversation a year ago, and that was part of the conversation, was identifying an amount to replenish the cash reserves, and the activity from this year solved that problem.
Did we use the federal dollars, the COVID money, to replenish the fund?
No.
We just, that was to balance operating costs.
Yep. And so, in fact, in 2020, we actually fell short. We had a deficit that year of almost 2.8 million. So we recovered in 2021, and then this year, if you can't tell, I'm moving the cell cursor, but I should probably actually point to it. So we recovered nicely in 2021 with the help of the money, but it was the business taxes that rebounded all the way back to where they were pre-COVID. And that's what replenished the fund balance, because in 2020, we were actually below or out of compliance with the policy, and then because of the recovery, we're back in compliance.
Bill, so can you go to, I guess, the entities that we donate money or we help fund, like the library, the police department? Can you go to that slide?
Yep. We lose a little bit off the side, but you can see your full name there.
You know, when you talk about cutting, and I've brought this up before, some of these entities have large reserves of investable assets, cash reserves, you know, in the millions. So before we raise taxes on our residents, shouldn't we ask them to use some of their money? Like the library, I think they have several million in endowment. And I've brought this up year after year after year, that we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, where we're basically, one entity has the money, they don't want to use it, so we're going to raise taxes to help fund the library or another entity. And I'm not saying that they should cover all the shortfall, but some of it. So that's one potential opportunity. Another, in the past, I've suggested a pilot, where we could ask some of our larger nonprofit institutions to help as well. So I think that these are two other avenues that should be explored. And it's nothing that you haven't heard from me or hasn't been said for the several years that I've been up here.
So I'd like to just respond to that. One is, at least the library is the one that you raised. Those endowments are restricted, so they can't, it's not like the fund that we have.
I mean, are they?
Where you can just tap into it. So
is all that money restricted? I mean, how much, so every
nonprofit
dime.
endowments are restricted.
So every single dime is restricted.
Right, because
So
they use the interest out of that fund to support their operating expenses.
So if we didn't give them any money, then they would have to go into that endowment. That's what an endowment is for. So
But
we're gonna.
Well, the endowment is to create a revenue stream of reliable cash through the
Sure,
interest payments. And so the bigger the endowment, the bigger revenue you're getting out of it. So no, the endowment corpus is restricted.
But again, we're raising taxes on our residents when they have the money, where they may have to change some of their, we change ordinances and we change our rules and regulations. You know, it's a different time, and in desperate times, there's sometimes desperate measures. And I think that is one solution that should be examined, other than protecting these entities that have a lot of money. I mean, I don't want to tell someone that is having trouble feeding their kids or buying medicine or gassing their car, that we're going to raise taxes on you to help an entity that is doing fine. That's where it's very hard for me to reconcile that. The board may have to look at some of these endowments. I don't know, Bill, just curious what your
Well,
thoughts are.
so for the last couple of years, we administratively, we've been very careful not to compete or put ourselves in a position where we're putting public works or police up against the library. So we've tried to separate the two. Your question about, first places to cut, if
That was
I
Jack's,
would ask
not
the
mine.
board.
That's why I'm.
Yeah, I mean, that's
why I'm
a
saying,
decision for the board to make.
not our
I-
dump trucks.
We are approaching this from a favorable position. I know when we talk about tax increases, it's never a comfortable conversation, and we always would love them to always be zero in terms of the increase. But again, I'm going back to the discussion in September when I initially presented is trying to churn the ship and increase financial sustainability. I don't know if we're sitting in a position right now, especially when we're having such a good year on the business tax revenues, of talking about cutting money from other organizations, including our own operation. I'm not sure that's the position we're in. 2 years ago, we absolutely were in that position because when the business tax revenues dropped by $2.5+ million in 1 year. We're sitting in a circumstance where we had no idea if and when or how they were going to come back. Again, because of the resiliency of our businesses and our community, they did rebound, and they rebounded nicely. So, I'm not sure. Fund balance might be the best place to start if we're talking about balancing tax adjustments versus
How does
what we're spending. From my perspective,
Sure.
I'm not sure. We have a multi-million-dollar surplus, and we're cutting someone's budget.
So, two questions.
And then just real quick, before we get too far off of the pilot, we've addressed that
I
with
know, keep
any of the
keep it
institutions.
relevant. They don't want to do it, but
Yeah.
there's always a need. Two questions about what you brought up before. If we do cut the fund balance, how does that affect our debt rating, as I always ask? And you're saying that now we're not doing a facilities bond, or you're so.
So two things.
Yes. Kind of.
So
Thought we were looking at a facilities fund.
the impact to the bond rating is the negative impact. As long as we're following the policy that you've adopted as a board, if we're following that, there is no negative impact. If we are in excess of the fund balance and decide to use that in a year in lieu of a tax adjustment or any other decision, there is no negative impact on that side. Conversely, if we're following the policy and we have adequate funding levels, and we show the bonding agencies a willingness to adjust taxes to fund ongoing things, that will have a favorable impact. And we're not talking big swings. It's not like we're going to go from AA1 where we are today to AAA because of a 0.1028 millage increase. It's a behavioral thing. It's one of the behind the curtain check marks that we would get in our favor. In any regard, what we do with the 2023 budget is not going to have a material impact on bond rating. With the facilities bond, as we did with the 2019 and 2016 bonds, were two different circumstances. So 2016, we were actually increasing the debt of the township to do the parks and facility or trails bond, and the board at the time elected to adopt a tax rate to fund that. In 2019, we were in a position we had old debt that was expiring and falling off the books, and we just refilled that bucket with new debt. So we didn't increase the expense of the township, therefore no tax adjustment needed. The facilities bond that we're proposing, or that's part of what I'm proposing for next year, increases the expense of the township. Therefore, if we don't establish a dedicated funding source to help take care of that, I'm not sure I would recommend it. again, going back to the sustainability portion of what I'm recommending.
Commissioner Jones, were you gonna, I saw your light go on. You're good.
I think you addressed it. I just wanted to make sure that Commissioner Farhi understood the concept of the endowment, which I think you addressed, so it's fine.
No,
So I just say to the point about the community organizations, you know, we go through this every year. I think we are not of one mind on how to approach this, and so we tend to just carry it over. And I can appreciate that it's a frustrating conversation for a lot of us for that reason. I don't think that we have done anything to get us into a different situation tonight. I know that last year I had hoped that conversations would, you know, occur. We've got a lot of other business in front of the board. It just never came up. No commissioner ever put it on the agenda, and we didn't get there. So we're in the same situation, and I am not of a mind to cut our support of things like libraries in Radnor. I mean, I can't see a way to do that. And I know that they've asked for increased support this year. I'm supportive of that as well. I just don't see a way that we can be a community that doesn't support our library and our fire companies. I know that there are smaller organizations on this list. Some we cut, saving the township $5,000 one year. I mean, it seemed like a pointless move at that time. So they've now come back and asked for kind of that original amount where they were. So this is not, for me, this is not where I think we're sharpening pencils. I am supportive of the community organizations until we have come up with some other process or some other decision from this board. And none of us did it. So we're here at the same place we were last year. So I'm fine with this. I do have a couple of questions about things you're now saying about our fund balance is really healthy.
Yeah.
You know, with this level of increase, we're looking at access to $10 million that we could use for capital. But really, it seems to me that it's also just a financial, theory is the wrong word, but a financial approach to get to a sustained, stable way of keeping our budget healthy and be able to provide all of the amazing services to our community. So I do have a quick question about the bond. If we were to approve it and we go and we get a $10 million bond, the projects have already been identified, or is that an open question, knowing that the intention is for township infrastructure buildings, but that's the amount that would cover those needs? Is there extra kind of considered in there? Is 10 million like gonna be spent right off the bat, or is it money to kind of play with?
Yeah, so we've identified improvements to various facilities that total just shy of 10 million. As I presented at the last meeting, or whenever that was, we had that discussion. I think it was the last meeting. The Public Works Garage and this building, those are known problems with facilities that we own and control without any, I don't think there's a whole lot of discussion. It's roofs, it's mechanical systems, it's driveways, it's, you know, those types of things. The Sopizio Gym carries a little different conversation just because of the ownership issue. And then the Willows Cottage is definitely something that needs a lot more conversation. We have estimates in there for various ideas, but those all would be separate conversations held next year, and we would nail down exactly what the board wants to do with those. We're confident that no matter which direction we go with the facilities, $9.5 million is kind of where we're going to be. If it's a little lower, great. The bond number goes down by accordingly. If it's a little higher, we tried to keep it less than 10 million because that does carry, you know, cost savings on the bond market. But at the end of the day, if we have improvements that cost 12 million, we need to do improvements that cost 12 million. And incrementally, what that does to the 260,000 and eventually to the 500,000 in future years for that bond, It a million here or there it moves that number, but it's not significantly. I guess is what I'm saying. What really moves that number is changes in interest rates. So we are seeing it creep up. And then just to reconcile the fund balance, when we're presenting and we're putting this together in July, August, and then presenting in September, most of that money wasn't here yet. That's come in September and October with a really good discovery month in October. So the circumstances changed for the better in our favor. So, and it does speak to the volatility of the business taxes. We could get another one this month. We could learn when they file next spring, that the larger economic situation that is occurring is hurting those revenues. So that again speaks to the uncertainty.
So you raised something else I'd like to ask you is sort of the effect of the economy today. So can you speak to what you're seeing about township costs, where we're really sort of seeing such a large increase that it's affecting the overall, and part of the reason why you're coming with a budget that doesn't quite balance? Is that sort of cost that we're all feeling? Is it gas? Is it those types of things? If you can identify sort of our real pain point.
Sure. Operationally, we've had deficits. At budget time, we've had deficits. And we just looked at the numbers from 2021 where we had an amazing recovery. But in 2020, when we were talking about the 2021 budget, we didn't know that was going to end that way. So we had when we were talking about budgets, we were structurally deficit then. We had the $1.7 million in federal grant money that bridged that gap. Fast forward a year later, we're in the same situation. The budget without that $1.7 million would have been a deficit, but we had the federal money, so it balanced it out. We're here today. We don't have the 1.7. We've decided to bite off a little bit more in terms of trying to anticipate business tax gains. So that's helped offset some of the deficit number that we're budgeting. In terms of the economic situation today, so the answer there is this is something that has existed for years and years and years. We've gotten through based on circumstances that occurred outside of our knowledge during budget season. So we didn't know the federal government was going to give us 2 years of $1.7 million in 2020 when we were doing the 21 budget. Nor did we know the business taxes were going to come back as strong as they did that year and then again this year. So the larger economic circumstances is not driving the deficit as much as it is a structural issue that we're just kind of, for lack of a better metaphor, we're swinging and hitting, kind of fortunate home runs. It's not what's going to happen on a regular basis, going back to sustainability.
So on a regular basis, is there any type of, predictive analytics that you, as the financial whizzes, are seeing that is telling you that we shouldn't be comfortable anymore, that we are not going to see the business taxes come in the way they did this year? Is there anything in your crystal ball?
I'll tee it up, and then, Bob, if you want to add some color. In my experience here in Radnor, going back, so I started working here in 2011, and one of the first things we did is we went back a few years and reconstructed the finances during those years, which turned out, if we all recall, was a pretty significant recession in our country. The business taxes at that time took a multi-million-dollar nosedive in 2008 or 9. My years might be off at this point, but it tied pretty closely with the recession of the country, as did the recovery then that followed. And business taxes trend in a positive way in each of the years following where the larger economy did. until COVID, and they reacted the exact same way then. So we had COVID, business taxes did the exact same thing. The crystal ball is not telling us right now is what's going to happen next year, because I would have suspected that business taxes would have slowed down, given the economic circumstances of the last year and a half, but this year they did not. So again, I don't know, Bob, I'll put you directly on the spot. If you're working daily in this, are you seeing anything different, or is Michelle giving you information that's different?
No, nothing dramatically different. It's just, I think the resources we've dedicated in the past year and a half to 2 years, year and a half, we've been able to, I guess, step up the compliance and the administrative and enforcement side. That there's just a consistency in terms of our administrative efforts, but that I don't feel is really driving the bus, so to speak, because we do still have, we talk about reliance on business taxes. Not only is it a reliance, but when we look at the top 10 or top 20 business taxpayers in the township, that's about 1/3 of the business tax base. So there are a lot of things outside of our control, whether it's the economics, whether it's the demographics of the company. If an organization decides to move into town or move out of town, it is a little scary. I guess the answer is there are no predictive analytics that I feel comfortable putting out there saying that this is going to continue, other than our efforts on a regular basis to ensure that there's compliance across the board. We have a tremendous discovery effort on our team, helping to uncover businesses who should be paying and that are not. So it's a full team effort. But even with all that working, we could have a shift, as we saw back in 2017 and 18, and we did some work back then to discover large organizations who moved out of town a little while before that was refilled. So it's a little, we tread cautiously when we talk about this, and to budget something that is, incredibly aggressive or optimistic would not be a good idea. I think we do proceed cautiously, and we do budget very. So I don't want to sound grim or negative or pessimistic. I think things are in a good slot or in a good position, but there are factors definitely outside of our control that are something we think about all the time.
Yeah, and the one other element that, as Bob was talking, that reminded me is this is a tax, and it's paid based on a lagging indicator. So businesses filing next year, before May of next year, are filing on activity that occurred this year. So that's where the predictability gets very, very difficult. We don't get quarterly estimates. There's no regular stream of information that tells us how it's going to do over time. It's an annual filing, and it's based on activity that we don't have access to that occurred a year ago, and that's why we have no control.
Can I just jump in? Commissioner, okay. I would agree that it's hitting a moving target when it comes to inflation, economic. So I guess what you could do is kind of do like 2 standard deviations outside what the expected mean is, and hope that you don't have that outlier of a COVID year or something. The thing that happens once every 100 years, that really happens once every 10, as we all know.
Talking about storms now, rainstorms.
Yes, storms, and but
the biweekly 500-year storm.
Yes, but we'll talk about during stormwater. Is now a good time to talk about the facilities bond or not? Just what I brought up, or is there? So yes or no?
I mean, it's part of what the proposal was for next year's budget, so it seems relevant.
Yeah, just real quick at that facilities bond. Before and I spoke to you, Commissioner Maroney, as well as you, Bill. Before we go out and look at spending millions of dollars into an asset that we don't own, we should approach the school board about buying it. I don't have a problem. Obviously, I know what an endowment is, and if this township said, we're not going to give the library any money, and I'm not suggesting that, I think that there's a balance, the library would have to use some of their endowment. So no, I'm not suggesting that, but what I am suggesting is that a nominal increase in taxes is something that maybe I could stomach in voting for, provided that we have 40% inflation when it comes to gasoline, and you're going to have labor increases, you have unions that get certain increases every year. I understand that inflation is going on all around us. I would just, again, like to see that kind of evened out. When it comes to the facilities bond, that's just something that I'm looking at, that to spend millions of dollars in an asset that we don't own when there could be other issues is just something that I personally don't have that appetite for. I don't know. We're looking at spending how much into 4 million, was it, to Supposio?
It wasn't quite that high, but it was yeah, at least 2.
Okay, and I don't know what that asset is worth, especially in that condition. You know, it's worth X amount in the condition that's in now, and then it's worth Y amount if we put that money into it. So before I could vote on any facilities bond, I think that we should at least see if this board has an appetite to talk about investing millions of dollars in something that we don't own, and it hasn't been smooth sailing, unfortunately, with them. So, or with that, not with the school board, but with that facility. So I do want to touch on that.
So mechanically, if included in next year's budget, and we're calling it a facilities bond, and part of the recommendation from our perspective, and we approach this from a use perspective, not an ownership perspective. The gym is used almost all the time, and there's so many more opportunities for it. Yes, there are some significant hurdles, both in terms of its current structure, and then obviously the landlord-tenant part of the discussion. So mechanically, including it in our discussion tonight as an item for next year, and we're not locking in that we're going to spend any money at Supposio Gym. It just says that, you know, we are giving ourselves the financial flexibility to borrow up to that amount if we proceed. If we get to a point where that is not something that the board is willing to support, we had a whole list of $17 million of other projects that could have easily slid in the same spot. Okay. So it's not like we're locking in on anything.
Got it. It should have been an if-then statement.
Yeah, it's giving us the flexibility to afford up to that amount for facilities. We're not even tied to facilities. It could be facilities, infrastructure, parks, trails, roads, sidewalks, intersections, anything that is the township wants to spend the money on. We prioritize those as items that are heavily used and also in need of significant improvement. And that building if it's going to continue to exist in its current state, it needs help.
I did not hear you tell us what the median taxpayer would pay as a result of the increase that you're proposing. I might have just missed it.
I had it on the slide. I did not mention it out loud.
$68.
Oh, yeah, so hang on. I got my formulas are. There you are. Yeah, so for the average, it'd be $69. For the median, $56 for the year.
That's per year, not per hour or something?
No, that's the whole year, yeah.
So if we I mean, we're going to spend a lot of time, I suspect, tonight haggling over whether the number goes up by 1/10 of a percent, by 1/4%, by whatever. But we're talking about, ultimately, we're going to be asking the median taxpayer in Radnor Township to pay $68 versus $60 versus $55, right? Extra.
Yeah, in terms of those tax rates, yes.
So I'm just minded of the fact that I got a phone call on my first year on the board when we raised taxes by what was then just 3% by a very, very angry resident who told me that I was costing him tens of thousands of dollars. And I walked through it with him, and after a little while, he figured out that we were talking about raising his property taxes, not his income taxes, and he promptly hung up on the phone with me, and I never heard from him again. So I guess my counsel to the board, to the extent that any of you are interested, is we're really not talking about moving the needle much for people here. This is not worth a whole lot of agita. On the flip side of the coin, the township needs to be able to continue to be able to service trash, police, everything that we do here, which means that the $69 that we're asking for from people, if we end up with 55, the reality is we may not be able to have a working sewer system, may not be able to have a working septic system, may not be able to have a working police. It's late. I know that we don't do septic, but I'm tired. Yeah, so I'm fine with this number. If the board's pleasure is ultimately to do 65 instead of 68 or 62 instead of 68, I'll vote for that too. I just don't want to spend a lot of time hang-wringing over what is really not that much money.
One quick note to that, that last bullet point on the one presentation slide said there was a little bit of over and above, again, moving us away from business taxes and to give us a little cushion. We did go back and do a break even, and that's what's down here in the shaded area. So that's based on needing $474,000 to balance just the deficit. So there's an adjustment there too.
So that one does not include going out for the bond, or it does?
It wouldn't. It would. Yes, it would.
So we'd still get the bond.
We'd still get the bond because we have the grant. I didn't talk about it tonight, but we include additional grant money into our estimates because that's an effort that we have someone working on, and she's been successful already. So yes, that's break even, including the bond, which is the only element that we're considering adding to the budget.
Are we providing a cost of living or similar increase for staff?
Yeah, so most of the staff, the staff in Public Works, many in this building are part of the rate union, and our collective bargaining agreement has 2 3/4% increase for those folks next year. Similar, our collective bargaining agreement with the FOP and our police officers has a 2.75. And then in the budget, we included the same increase for all non-union civilian staff.
Including yourself?
I have an agreement with the board that dictates what that is, so that's, yeah.
Kept seeing like, except for the manager, and I didn't.
That's why,
That's
yeah, because I have a separate employment agreement there.
Understood, okay.
Yes.
Are there any other questions or comments tonight?
Yeah, I understand the point that, it's, the median's 56 or 69, however we want to look at it. If I'm still hearing, Bill, from you that taking from the reserves $650,000 or $500,000 to cover the shortfall, and we're still within compliance, to me, that's what the reserves is for. We're still meeting our number that we think is a healthy number. We're drawing down to cover the shortfall and zero increase to the residents. That to me is the most ideal situation. To Commissioner Mulroney's point about the community organizations, I agree. I've been talking about this for 5 years, and it's really painful to be up here and have the same conversation every year. So I think in January, I'd like to see this board have a conversation. So whether that's pegging it to the revenue stream, whether it's weaning some of the organizations down to a number, let's throw all those options out there and have a discussion. So the community organizations, they're not guessing at the end of the year. They know what to expect, and we don't have to waste 30 minutes, an hour up here every October and November saying the same thing over and over. Let's just finally get it done. In addition to that, have some criteria. I'm just waiting for the day where 20 organizations show up and say, well, we want some funding too.
Commissioner, I invite you to ask for that to be on an agenda in January. I would love to have that discussion.
I'm asking tonight, so I'll ask again on January 1st.
I think we just took note of it.
Okay.
We'll put a placeholder in for the second meeting in January. The first one's January 2nd.
Okay, because to the point, I don't know if someone said this, but I've heard it before. It's $200,000. It's a small percentage of the budget. Well, over any commissioner's term, we're now talking. Since I've been up here, we're talking $1 million. So it's real money, and it impacts the budget and what we do. So again, my points. I'd like to draw down the general fund. We're still in compliance, and then hopefully we have another big victory next year and we can replenish. Otherwise, we're still in compliance. And two, I won't belabor the community organization point again tonight, but happy that there seems to be support to have a discussion and finally get to a point where we have criteria and some direction, not only for this board, but for the community.
Other questions and comments?
I'll just make one more comment. It is marginal. $68 comes out to what, $5 a month for the average, $6 a month for the average person?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
a little more?
Yeah.
7? Okay. But a little less than 7. So, that's not even a latte at Starbucks these days. So, I can handle that. Jake, I understand what you're saying. My fear is if we draw it down and then we hit another issue where we do go into recession, and that is my biggest fear. I know that from what Bob said, it is hitting a moving target. We have no idea what's going on with inflation, the economy, and the fact is we never will. But what we've seen the past couple years with the shutdown and whatnot, if that happens again, we're in trouble, and then we'd have to raise maybe 4% and 4%, so you're looking at maybe 8 or 9%. Granted, it's marginal. It would be, from $7 a month next year to $14 a month. But again, I don't like the idea of having to raise taxes. I don't at all. But we have those reserves. Those are our emergency or rainy day reserves, and this doesn't, in my mind, qualify. COVID would qualify for that. So that's kind of my.
You're describing the exact scenario that played out in 11.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah, in 2011 and 12, the board increased real estate taxes by those amounts at over 10% or around 10% in back-to-back years. And then again, we were in the same position in 2020. We got the money from the federal government, which bought us a couple years where we were able to kind of hold things status quo. So
Yep.
You're describing a scenario that has played out in reality twice in the last decade.
Yeah, and Sean, if your hypothetical situation plays out, you still have the bulk sum of the reserves left to draw from. And as we see here, the number that we're taking out that would be impacted is 0.1%. So, if you have to go at that point and it's a dire situation, yeah, do it. But there's no need. We're not pushed to do it at this moment.
I guess my thinking is when you see inflation, real or nominal, and I'll put that in quotes, anywhere between no one knows, that's a moving target. Food cost, I was at Wegmans the other day, and a 20-pound fresh turkey is over $100. That's just that blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind. So when you think about all the services that we are getting, and it's only an extra $7 a month to the average person, that's something that I don't like. Without a doubt, I don't like it, as you know. And I have suggested alternatives, which probably won't go anywhere. But I think the average person can stomach. Not everybody, but the average person can stomach. And I'd have my own way to do it, but I don't think that's going to happen. So the a 4.5% or 5% or 4%, whatever is agreed upon on that by this board, I can stomach with just a little nausea.
But it also now establishes the new baseline. So you're never going to lower taxes.
You're not going to lower taxes because listen to what Bill said. I mean, everyone, our employees get a cost of living increase, whether it's with a union. Supplies are going to go up. I mean, unless you see, and not to say that concrete is going to go down or lumber is going to go down. It fluctuates, but generally speaking, there is not, we live in inflationary time, whether it's obscene of inflation as we are now at 40% or maybe 4, 5, 10 years ago we're at 2 or 3%. I mean, the money supply is always increasing, and as the money supply always increases, it makes goods and services increase as well, and unfortunately, we have to keep up with that. Just as any entity, whether your business has to raise prices or not, this is how we raise prices. I just wish there was another way to do that in the sense of asking some of our community organizations as well as nonprofit institutions to kind of look at that and to see if there's anything that they could give so we don't have to tighten our belt.
Well, the more stable our revenue stream is, the less likely we'll be in a position where we have to make drastic swings in either direction. I mean, tax reduction in the future is going to come at the cost of a service. If there's new technology out there that does away with something we're doing now, then potentially. But, all things being equal, yeah, the costs are going to go up. But to the extent, and this is part of what I'm trying to portray, is the more secure our revenue stream is and predictable, we are lessening the potential impact on the taxpayers in the long run. So, no tax increases over a period of time feels really good until you get hammered. And we've seen that happen a couple different times. So if we're able to move the tax rates to a point where we have the sustainability built in, then we can lean on fund balance for a period of time to get us through a hard time without adjusting taxes. And we have more of that flexibility. Right now, as we're seeing, is we're floating right there. And if we do get hit hard economically, it's going to impact operations. If we have if we have the reliance on a more sustainable, reliable revenue source, we avoid the scenario where we're having to hit people hard. And I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact we are adjusting taxes. I'm not trying to be insensitive to that issue, but that is part of what we're talking about, is putting the township in a position where we're not having to make wild swings in a reactionary way.
Does anybody have any further comments, questions?
No, I just want to say that I support the idea of moving away from leaning on the business tax as hard as we do for everything that you just said. And just, raising taxes is inevitable. So we're going to have to do it now or in the future. And I appreciate the fact that we can do it in a way that is mindful and not, as you say, swinging really hard and having to hit people hard with the millage rate increase.
So I think we've exhausted the conversation here by commissioners. I'll open it up to public comment if anybody has comment they'd like to make or questions. I'm not seeing anyone. So as I don't think I asked for a motion. I'll do that now. Do I hear a motion to approve ordinance 2022-16?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we have 5 to 1.
Very good, thank you. So we'll make sure that that's what's included in the advertisement, and then it'll be up for adoption on the 28th.
Yes, it will. Excellent.
In the
Thank you for
yeah.
that very clear presentation, and thank you all for a really good discussion around it. I think we're getting where we need to go. I'm now moving to the next item, which is a little bit of good news. Resolution 2022-85, providing property tax and rent rebates to certain eligible residents. May I hear a motion on this? And
So moved.
And a second. Thank you.
Would this rebate be for
Is this-
$56?
Say this again? I missed it.
I said, would this rebate be for $56?
I'm hoping for the right people. Mr. Tate, is this you? Are you going to present this?
Thank you, Madam President. I'll kick it off, and Ms. Amy Lacey's here to provide answers to any questions you may have on any of the details. This was before the board back in September. It was tabled at that time. There was a question about uniformity, which we did approach the solicitor, and we got clearance that there is not a uniformity issue in terms of the township offering this type of rebate program. As we mentioned before, it's a program that the state of Pennsylvania has offered, I think, since 1971, I believe. It's been around a long time. The school district adopted a similar rebate program recently in the past year, and the township is looking now to adopt a resolution modeling the same program, using the same parameters and same rules, and hopefully benefiting those who would need it the most. And Amy has some of the information on statistical data and what this might cost, if it follows the same information that we receive from the state in terms of those who are eligible to file.
Amy, can you speak to the details a little bit? Who would be eligible? What does it look like? Can we get them to fix $56?
We likely can get them to $56, yes. So it is for those 65 and older and making less than $35,000 a year. So those eligible home property owners would fill out their state application, and we would ask for a copy of that application, the approved application from the state, and then we would also issue them a refund up to the amount of tax that they pay into Radnor.
So maybe it was the school district one, but I did read about, is there a rebate for somebody with widow status?
Yes, I'm sorry. 55 and older that are, 50 and older, widowed and disabled owners that are 18 and older. Sorry about that, yes.
That's okay, but with the same income
Same
requirement?
income requirements, correct.
Okay, excellent. Is there any comment from commissioners? Is there any public comment? And I apologize, my brain just went a little mushy. Did I move this? Did we get a motion in a second? I did, right? Thank you. That's what I thought, sorry. So I will call a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye, passes unanimously, thank you. Moving on to C, ordinance 2022-17. This is an introduction establishing the sanitary sewer rent rate for 2023. Is this you, Mr. Tate? Are you coming up?
Myself and Amy.
Okay. Great.
Thank you for your time tonight. We'd like to just kind of give a brief overview of the sanitary sewer fund and its operations. And real quick, the township has 142 miles of pipe in the ground, about 3,900 manholes, and 4 sewer pumping stations. Staff-wise, we have 3 public works individuals dedicated to managing the sanitary sewer fund, its infrastructure, its the cleaning, and all else that goes along with managing the system. The township is a member of the RHM Joint Authority. That's Radnor, Haverford, Marple Joint Authority. What that is just really the 3 municipalities join together, and the total sanitary sewer and wastewater is transferred from the joint authority to the Delcora facility down along the Delaware River for treatment. And that's also where there are multiple collection systems from 46 surrounding municipalities that feed into Delcora for their wastewater treatment. I'll let Amy take it from here and talk a little bit about, the water inflow and outflow.
So to talk a minute about water consumption versus water treatment, every time you turn on your faucet, your shower, your washer, dishwasher, that's your water coming in, and Aqua charges you for that. Water going down the drain, that's the water that's coming out, and that's what Radnor charges the residents for. They flow into the pipes in Radnor, then through RHM, and then through Delcora for
Can I
treatment.
just stop you there? So if I use my garden hose, that's not going
That's
in
correct.
the drain. So
That's
it's
correct.
just all water, all your water usage,
Right.
whether it goes in the drain or not.
Right.
I just want to clarify that.
So when we plan for the sanitary sewer budget, we do have to consider RHM's budget. And if you'll see on the graphic up here, we did an analysis on RHM's budget from 2015 through 2022. The 2023 number is not a solid number yet, but as you can see, a large part of RHM's budget is the expense for Delcora, and that is up to, as part of their 2022 budget, that is 73% of their budget. And interestingly, of the 5 municipalities that are under the RHM umbrella, Radnor makes up for 45% of that. This is just a slide showing the graphics. On the on the right, you see RHM's operating and administrative costs, which really don't go up too much every year. And on the left, you see the Delcora expense, and in 2015 it was $7 million, and in 2022 it was $8.9 million. So it has gone up a lot.
And for 2023, preliminary estimates, it would be up to about 9.5. So just in a 9-year period, it's going from $7 million to $9.5 million. These are all pass-through costs from Delcora to RHM, and then RHM allocates to the participating municipalities. So with that, just taking a look at Radnor Township's rate history, rates have not been really that volatile. 2015 and 2016, 2017 unchanged, and then again in 2020 and 21 unchanged. So as we receive our information from RHM, and unfortunately what happens is this time of year, as Amy just mentioned, we don't have solid numbers. So what's going to happen in 2023, as we're now approving this budget, we don't know for sure. So we've relied on some of the historical information and projections that we get, but the last couple of years, it has spiked up. So in Radnor's budget, as presented to this board, the preliminary budget, you see the column over here for the township manager recommended. At that point, the budget was presented with no change. This was up for discussion. We wanted to show the board with no change in rate, and given the incredible percentage of our costs that goes directly to RHM for treatment, 70 to 72%, without a change in rate, next year we would be at a $1.2 million deficit, which would then, of course, we'd be dipping into the fund balance reserve. what is being proposed for the budget for 2023 is an adjustment just to get to break even. This is not counting any capital improvements or set aside for capital plans. That's a whole nother discussion. But for just balancing the budget for the operating costs and the pass-through costs from RHM, an increase of $1.27 to $10.16 per 1,000 gallons of water. And again, this would just simply balance out the operations of the sanitary sewer fund for 2023 and not have any reliance on general fund reserves to supplement this. Be happy to go through any questions on any other details or information. We literally just backed into what we need to balance the fund, so we're not dipping into general fund reserves to cover this.
So it's an increase of $1.27 per 1,000 gallons. Do you
Correct.
have any information about average usage so that we can put that in real, like how, again, like we did with the budget, how would it
Yes.
affect the average household?
So what we have, the median, and this is residential and businesses. So the median bill, annual bill, is about $450. So, and this kind of an increase is about a 14.3%. So we're looking at another approximately $60 a year to the median consumer.
But the median would include, you know, a car wash or a very conservative household, you know. I mean,
Exactly.
it includes all of those businesses that might use water.
That's exactly right.
So my feeling is, obviously, maybe Jake, you should have said $120 instead of 59.
It all adds up.
Yeah, it does. But I think that is a small price to pay to make sure that this is not in the hands of a for-profit entity that would go to the PUC to raise our sewer tax, whether we need it, or sewer fee, whether we need it or not. So Aqua, if we sold the sewer, and that always happens every so often, should we sell it? Should we keep it? Well, if we do sell it, they're gonna, you know, they're an entity that they're gonna try to maximize their profits, and right here we're breaking even, and we do have repairs. So if it went up even more, it's not good. But I would rather see it stewarded by the township, whose goal is to provide a service, a not-for-profit service. So that's a lot of money, 13%, $60. Again, it's an extra $5, $5, $6 a month. But I still think that it is a small price to pay, not to have this in a, you know, a Fortune 500 company that will raise. So again, I will begrudgingly support this, although, because I know what the alternative is, which is longer term. You're going to have, you know, eventually we can sort this out, we'll be in better shape. But long term, I do not want to be at the mercy of any for-profit company and the PUC. Thanks.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Again, Amy, I'm sorry. So when Commissioner Farhi asked his question, how does PA Aqua know if the water is going into your swimming pool or watering your lawn or your gardens?
They don't. We
Right, so-
offer a program where you can put a deduct meter on those lines that.
But you have to do that. That's.
You do. Yeah,
Yes.
the resident
Okay.
does have to do that.
I just want to make that
yeah.
point because it's a big, could be a lot of water that people put
It
out.
absolutely
for-
could
yeah,
be, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Tate and Ms. Lacy? Is there any comments from the public? Any public comment? I'm not seeing any. I will, shoot, did I ask for a motion? Okay, in a second.
Second.
And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
Sorry, end of the night. We have an additional item, Resolution 2022-145. This is establishing the stormwater fee for 2023. Can I hear a motion?
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Okay, and Mr. Tate, are you speaking to this one? Is this you, Mr. White?
I got it, Madam President. As required by the original ordinance that adopted the fee, the board is required to revisit on a regular basis the stormwater fee, and if any changes, adopt by resolution. So this resolution, while there is no change, it is before the board just to reaffirm the rate for 2023.
Excellent. So I'm going to say it again. No change. It was the rate we were paying in 2022.
Correct.
We're just reaffirming it.
Now, that's a stormwater thing that I can vote for.
Yeah, I think you might have some support on this. Anybody want to speak to it? Any questions?
Any chance for a reduction?
I think you just got laughter on that. I think you got your answer. So. Is there any public comment on this issue? I will call the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And it has passed. So we will thank you for a very fulsome conversation about the budget. We will be back with a couple of these items for adoption at our next meeting. Moving on to reports of board liaisons. Does anybody want to speak to one of the civic committees?
I'll go real quick with Parks and Rec. So I was at the Parks and Rec meeting. Again, we're talking about Odoricio's to the people at home. If you live close to Odoricio, you're a stakeholder or a user of that park, please come. Contact me, or I'm sure Commissioner Abel would love to hear from you, or the Parks Department. Tammy Cohen and her staff, they've done a lot of great things. There was a run, a 5K run, which I did not and will not participate because I don't run. I find it. But moving on, we're going to have the Santa's delivery. So get your gifts ready, or your ideas ready to tell Santa Claus. And if you want to tell Santa Claus, I think the day after, that Saturday after Thanksgiving, and that's good. So you can drop your gifts off, or
Yeah,
at
Sean, isn't
Township.
that service available starting like the Monday of Thanksgiving? And they can
no,
do it all.
I think it's the Saturday after. Bill?
So I think the Recreation Department is allowing drop-offs sooner than that.
Okay.
The final day of drop-off is that Saturday after Thanksgiving, but there's a chimney set up right outside the department
Got
as
it.
we
It's
speak.
a chimney, right? Just for all the.
Oh, fireplace and chimney, yeah.
For all the 5-year-olds at home that love watching these meetings about budget. Yeah. So, no, just kudos to
never
Tammy and her staff. They do a wonderful job. And as we talk about $5 or $6 a month extra, this is why Radnor is a great place to live, is because of our wonderful parks and the wonderful amenities that our staff and our Parks Department provide. So hats off to them, and that's my report.
Speaking of runs, the library, so Radnor Memorial Library will be having their annual Elves for the Shelves run December 3rd. So it's a fundraiser to help support the library, and it's also a great time. You can walk it if you don't run, which I plan to do.
I don't walk unless I have to either.
All right, I think we're getting a little slap happy here. Anybody else on committee reports? How about some new business?
I have something.
Yep.
So on Wednesday, I think, is Lieutenant Pinto still here? He's not here. So Lieutenant Pinto on Wednesday is going to be hosting a self-defense class for anyone who's interested. It's geared towards women, but anyone can join. I think it's really beneficial for kids who are becoming more independent around town to join as well. So I would say anyone around 10 years old and up from there, but they must be accompanied by a parent. It's Wednesday at 7 p.m. here in the Radnor Shire room.
Any old business? Any public participation? And I will call to adjourn. Do I have a motion? And a second? All in favor say aye. Thank you very much. Yes, there's a meeting tomorrow night at what time in this room? At 7 o'clock to the third meeting on the redistricting. So if you are interested in that, please come out.